I was handcuffed to a stainless steel table in an FBI interrogation room when I finally understood what my father's inheritance really meant. Not the rusted Ford Bronco everyone laughed about. Not even the billion-dollar empire my sister Sophia got. No, the real inheritance was the truth buried deep in the San Juan Mountains, and it was about to destroy everything the Thorne family had built. The agent across from me slid a folder full of photographs toward my cuffed hands. Bodies, experiments, a laboratory that looked like it belonged in a horror movie, not in my father's legacy. She asked me one question that made my blood run cold. Did you know what your father was doing to those people? Before you hear how I ended up here, before I tell you about the human cost of genius and greed, I need you to do something for me. If this story makes you feel anything, if it makes you think about what family really means, hit that like button. Subscribe because this is just the beginning of what I uncovered. And comment below, tell me what you would have done in my position. Would you have walked away, or would you have fought for the truth no matter the cost? Now let me take you back to where it all started. 3 months ago, in a lawyer's office that smelled like old money and older lies. The invitation to my father's will reading arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to my ranger station in Glacier National Park. I remember the exact moment because I was tracking a grizzly that had been getting too comfortable near the campgrounds. The ranger who brought me the envelope looked apologetic, like he was interrupting something important. He was, but death doesn't care about your schedule. I hadn't seen Marcus Thorne in 3 years. Our last conversation had ended with him telling me I was wasting the expensive education he'd paid for by choosing to live like a glorified park janitor. I'd told him that at least I could sleep at night, which was more than I could say for someone who made billions manipulating genetic code without thinking about the consequences. He'd hung up on me. I'd felt relief more than anything else. Now he was dead at 62, and apparently, he'd left me something. I couldn't imagine what. We'd never been close, not even when I was a child desperate for his attention. He'd always preferred Sophia, my older sister, by 4 years. She had his mind for business, his ruthless focus, his ability to see people as assets or liabilities rather than human beings. I'd always been too soft for his taste. Too concerned with things that didn't matter, like whether research subjects had consented or whether profit justified every cost. I requested emergency leave and flew to New York on a red-eye, arriving at LaGuardia just as dawn was breaking over the city. I'd forgotten how much I hated New York. The crowds, the noise, the way everyone moved like they were late for something crucial. Montana had space. Montana had silence. Montana let you think without the world screaming at you from every direction. My studio apartment in Queens had been sublet to another ranger while I was away, but I'd kept a key. The place smelled stale and looked smaller than I remembered. I showered, changed into the only dress I owned, and tried not to think about what the day would bring. Part of me hoped Dad had left me nothing. That would be honest, at least. A clean break that matched the emotional distance between us. The law offices of Carter, Whitney, and Associates occupied floors 47 through 50 of a skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. I'd been there once before, for my mother's will reading 5 years earlier. That day had been different. Mom had loved me, in her way, before the disease took her mind and left just a body that breathed and blinked but no longer knew her own daughters. She'd left me her jewelry, some stock portfolios, and a letter written during one of her last lucid moments. I still had that letter. I'd read it so many times the paper was soft as fabric. The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt longer than the flight from Montana. My reflection in the polished steel doors showed a woman who didn't belong in this building. I was 31 but looked younger, my face tanned from working outdoors, my hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, no makeup beyond some chapstick. Hands that were calloused from handling equipment and building trails. I looked like exactly what I was, someone who'd chosen a different path. The reception area was all marble and mahogany, with abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than I made in 5 years. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect makeup and a smile that never reached her eyes, directed me to conference room A. She looked at my dress, at my hiking boots that I'd tried to polish but still showed their age, and I saw the judgment in her eyes. I was used to it. People like her had been looking at me that way my whole life. Sophia was already there, of course. She believed being early was a power move, a way to claim psychological territory. She sat at the head of the conference table like she already owned the room, scrolling through her phone with one hand while the other tapped an expensive pen against a leather portfolio. She wore a charcoal gray Armani suit that probably cost $5,000, paired with heels that added 3 inches to her already impressive height. Her hair was cut in a severe bob that made her look like a CEO from a movie. She was a CEO, actually, of 3 different companies, last I'd heard. She glanced up when I entered, and something flickered across her face. Not warmth. Sophia didn't do warmth, but maybe acknowledgement. Maybe a kind of grim satisfaction that we were both here for this ritual. "You look well," she said, her tone suggesting the opposite. "Outdoorsy." I sat across from her rather than next to her. "You look stressed." It was true. Despite the perfect exterior, I could see signs of strain in her face. Fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. A tightness in her jaw. She was thinner too, in a way that suggested weight loss from anxiety rather than exercise. Something was wrong with Sophia, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Benjamin Carter entered before Sophia could respond to my observation. He was 72, a contemporary of my father's who'd been handling Thorne family legal affairs since before I was born. He'd always been kind to me in a distant, professional way. Today he looked ancient, like he'd aged a decade in the months since Dad's death. His hands trembled as he arranged files on the table, and he avoided making eye contact with either of us. "Thank you both for coming," he said, his voice raspier than I remembered. "I know this is difficult." Marcus was a complicated man, and his wishes regarding his estate reflect that complexity. Sophia set down her phone. "Let's just get this over with, Ben. We all know what the will says." Father and I discussed it extensively. Ben's expression flickered with something I couldn't read. "Perhaps, but there are elements that might surprise you both." He opened the first folder and began the formal reading. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the essence was clear. My father had been worth more than I'd realized. $47 billion in liquid assets and investments, another $23 billion in real estate, patents, and equity stakes. Thorne Biogenetics, the crown jewel of his empire, was valued at somewhere north of $60 billion on its own. Sophia listened with the focused intensity of a predator. This was her world. Numbers and power and the mechanisms of wealth. I found my attention drifting to the view outside the window, Central Park spread out like a green lung in the city's concrete body. I wondered what it was like to maintain those trails, whether the rangers there felt the same connection to the land that I did in Montana. "To my daughter Sophia Thorne," Ben read. "I leave controlling interest in Thorne Biogenetics, specifically 51% of all voting shares. I also leave her the family estate in East Hampton, the penthouse apartment at 157 West 57th Street, my art collection currently valued at $470 million, and the entirety of my stock portfolio in other ventures." Sophia's face remained neutral, but I saw her shoulders relax slightly. This was what she'd expected. What she'd been groomed for her entire life. Ben continued through a list of charitable bequests. $50 million to Memorial Sloan Kettering for cancer research. $100 million to establish a scholarship fund at MIT for genetics students. Another $200 million split between various environmental and medical causes. It was performative generosity, the kind that looked good in obituaries and earned naming rights to buildings. I wondered how much of it was genuine and how much was just image management. Then Ben paused. His hand definitely trembled now as he turned to the next page. He cleared his throat twice before speaking. "And to my youngest daughter, Ava Thorne, I leave my 1993 Ford Bronco, vehicle identification number 1 FMEU 15N3 PLA 12847, currently stored at the Red Hook warehouse facility in Brooklyn." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ventilation system humming somewhere in the ceiling. I stared at Ben, waiting for him to continue. There had to be more. A trust fund, maybe. Some kind of stipulation or explanation. But he just looked at me with something like pity in his old eyes. Sophia started laughing. It began as a quiet chuckle that grew into full-throated amusement. She laughed so hard she had to set down her pen. When she finally composed herself, she wiped at her eyes, careful not to smudge her perfect makeup. "A truck," she said, her voice full of delighted malice. "Father left you a 30-year-old truck. Not even a nice truck. That piece of junk he used to take on his camping trips when he needed to pretend he was a regular person instead of a billionaire." "Is there anything else?" I asked Ben, ignoring Sophia. "Any conditions or explanations?" Ben shook his head. "Marcus was very specific. The Bronco goes to you, free and clear, no strings attached." Sophia leaned back in her chair, still grinning. "You know what this means, don't you, Ava? It means Father finally stopped pretending. He always knew who had the vision to lead his empire and who was just playing in the dirt. That truck suits you. Very rugged, very you." I'm sure it'll be perfect for hauling camping gear, or whatever it is you do out there in the wilderness. I should have felt something. Anger, hurt, humiliation. But mostly I just felt tired. This was so typical of my family, the casual cruelty disguised as honesty, the way they could make you feel small without even raising their voices. I signed the papers. Ben pushed toward me, acknowledging receipt of my inheritance. 1993 Ford Bronco, in unknown condition. Sophia signed her documents with a flourish, already on her phone before the pen left the paper, probably calling her assistant to schedule meetings about her new empire. I left without saying goodbye to either of them. In the elevator, I caught my reflection again and saw my mother's face looking back at me. Not the mother I'd known as a child, vibrant and laughing, but the mother from the end, hollow-eyed and lost. I pushed the thought away and focused on practical matters. I'd look at the truck, figure out if it was worth anything, and sell it for whatever I could get. Maybe it would pay for my flight back to Montana. That was the plan anyway. Simple and straightforward. I had no idea that the Bronco was going to change everything. The Red Hook warehouse was in an industrial area of Brooklyn that had been slowly gentrifying for years. The building itself was massive, a converted shipping facility that now stored the overflow from wealthy people's lives. Art they didn't have wall space for. Furniture from homes they'd sold. Cars they'd stopped driving but couldn't bear to part with. The manager who met me at the entrance was maybe 25, wearing skinny jeans and a vintage band t-shirt. He looked bored until he scanned the paperwork I'd brought and saw the Thorne name. Then his whole demeanor changed. Suddenly I was someone who mattered, someone who required good service. The Thorne collection is in Section D, he said, leading me through endless rows of climate-controlled storage. Your father kept quite a bit here, mostly automotive. He had a thing for classic cars. We passed shrouded shapes that might have been Ferraris or Lamborghinis, millions of dollars in vehicles that probably never saw roads anymore. The manager kept up a steady stream of chatter about the facility's security and environmental controls, but I wasn't listening. I was thinking about my father, about why he'd kept all this stuff, about what it meant to accumulate things you never used. The Bronco was at the back of Section D, uncovered and looking worse than I'd imagined. The forest green paint was oxidized to a dull matte finish. Rust bloomed around the wheel wells and along the bottom of the doors. The windshield had a crack running from corner to corner. The tires were flat. It looked like it had been driven hard and put away wet, as my grandfather used to say. "This is it," the manager said, sounding apologetic. "I can help you arrange for transport if you'd like. We have preferred towing companies." I walked around the truck slowly, taking in the damage. The rear bumper was dented. One taillight was held on with duct tape. The running boards were caked with dried mud. But underneath the neglect, I could see quality. This wasn't some cheap vehicle. It was a classic Eddie Bauer edition with four-wheel drive and a V8 engine. In good condition, it might actually be worth something. "Can I take it today?" I asked. "If I get it running?" The manager looked doubtful. "Ma'am, this thing hasn't been started in probably 2 years. The battery is definitely dead. You'd need a jump at minimum." "I've got time." He shrugged and handed me the keys. They were on a simple leather fob, worn smooth from years of handling. I recognized my father's monogram embossed on the leather. MT. Marcus Thorne. A man who'd put his initials on everything he owned, including his daughters, in a way. The manager left me alone with the truck. I opened the driver's door and was hit with a smell that transported me back to childhood. Leather and cologne and something else. Something that was purely my father. I hadn't expected that. Hadn't expected to feel anything at all, really. But standing there with the door open and that smell washing over me, I felt a weird pressure in my chest. I climbed into the driver's seat and just sat for a moment. The interior was worn but well maintained. Someone had taken care of this truck, even if the exterior suggested otherwise. The leather seats had been conditioned. The dashboard was dust-free. And when I put the key in the ignition and turned it to accessory power, something unexpected happened. The dashboard lit up, but not with the standard gauges you'd expect in a 1993 vehicle. Someone had retrofitted a GPS unit into the center console. It looked professional, carefully integrated, so it almost seemed factory-installed. The screen flickered to life, powered by some kind of backup battery, and showed a single saved location. Project Nightingale, read the tagline. Coordinates pointed to somewhere in the San Juan Mountains of southwestern Colorado. I clicked on the location details and saw a list of dates. 47 trips, spanning from 8 years ago to 3 days before my father's death. The most recent visit had been logged at 4:37 p.m. on the day he'd died. I sat there staring at that screen for a long time. Project Nightingale. My father had made 47 trips to the same remote location in the Colorado mountains. He'd been there the day he died, or at least the truck's GPS thought he had. What was out there? Some kind of research facility? A vacation home he'd never mentioned? I started searching the rest of the truck more carefully. The glove compartment held registration papers, an owner's manual, and a trail map of southwestern Colorado with a route marked in faded red ink. The route led from the nearest highway into the San Juan National Forest, following what looked like old logging roads and fire trails. Someone had marked specific waypoints along the route, numbered 1 through 7. The back seat was cleaner than I expected. Camping gear, neatly organized. A sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures. A camp stove. Water purification tablets. Emergency supplies, including a first aid kit that looked like it could handle anything short of major surgery. This wasn't the gear of a casual camper. This was the equipment of someone who spent serious time in the backcountry. I almost missed the hidden compartment. It was under the driver's seat, accessible only if you knew to press a specific spot on the seat frame. The carpet there was worn thinner than the rest, showing the outline of the panel. When I pressed it, I heard a soft click, and the panel swung down. Inside was a leather journal and a brass key. The journal was my father's. I knew his handwriting the way you know a parent's voice, some deep recognition that bypasses conscious thought. The entries started 8 years ago, right around the time Mom's symptoms had become impossible to ignore. January 15th. Sarah doesn't remember my name today. Called me sir when I came to visit. The doctors say this is normal progression. But how can watching your wife forget you be normal? How can this be acceptable? The girls don't understand. Sophia pretends it's not happening. Ava cries every time she visits. I need to fix this. There has to be a way. I flipped through more pages. The entries became increasingly technical, filled with genetic terminology and references to research papers. My father was a genius, everyone knew that. He built Thorne Biogenetics from nothing into a pharmaceutical powerhouse, but these notes showed an obsession I'd never seen before. March 3rd. Identified the mutation. Thorne 1, I'm calling it. Autosomal dominant. 50% chance of inheritance. Both girls have it. DNA tests confirmed. Sophia is showing early markers. Elevated tau proteins. Minor cognitive changes she's attributing to stress. She doesn't know I tested her. Better that way. I stopped breathing. Read that paragraph again, then again. Both girls have it. I had the same genetic flaw that killed my mother. Sophia was already showing symptoms, and my father had known, had tested us without our knowledge or consent. May 12th. Conventional approaches are too slow. FDA approval takes decades. I don't have decades. Sophia doesn't have decades. The mutation is aggressive. By the time she's 40, maybe 45, the symptoms will be severe. I need to find another way. Somewhere I can work without oversight. Somewhere I can do what needs to be done. That's when the entries started mentioning Project Nightingale. My father had found a location in the San Juan Mountains, a former government facility that had been decommissioned and forgotten. He'd purchased it through a shell company, renovated it in secret, and begun conducting research that would never have passed any ethics board in the country. The details were vague in the journal, more concerned with timelines and resource allocation than specific methodologies. But reading between the lines, I understood what he was doing. Human trials. Experimental gene therapy. Testing compounds on living subjects without the usual years of preliminary research. The last entry was dated 3 days before he died. Trial 47 shows promise. Subject survived 96 hours post-injection with minimal adverse effects. Cognitive function actually improved in short-term memory tests. But then the degradation began. Same pattern as all the others. The treatment works initially, then the body rejects it violently. I'm missing something. Some key factor I haven't identified. I'm running out of time. Sophia's symptoms are accelerating. If I don't solve this soon, I'll lose her the same way I lost Sarah. I closed the journal and sat in the truck, my hands shaking. My father hadn't been on a camping trip when he died. He'd been at a secret research facility, conducting illegal human experiments in a desperate attempt to cure his daughter. To cure my sister. To cure me, maybe, though he'd never cared enough to ask if I wanted to be saved. The brass key felt heavy in my hand. It was old-fashioned, the kind that opened a deadbolt rather than a modern lock. A number was engraved on it. 7. The 7th waypoint on the map, maybe. The final destination. I should have called someone. The police, the FBI, someone official who could handle this the right way. But I didn't. Because underneath the shock and horror, I felt something else. Curiosity. A need to understand what my father had done, what Sophia might be continuing, because if Project Nightingale had continued after Dad's death, that meant Sophia knew about it. That meant she'd made the choice to keep it running. That meant my perfect, brilliant, ruthless sister was even more dangerous than I'd thought. I spent the next 2 hours getting the Bronco running. The manager helped me jump the battery, and I drove it to a nearby auto parts store for a replacement, changed the oil myself in their parking lot, checked the fluids, aired up the spare tire. The truck was mechanically sound, better than it had any right to be. Someone had maintained it carefully, probably my father himself. This vehicle had been important to him. By late afternoon, I was on the road, heading west out of the city. I should have gone back to Montana, back to my job and my life and everything that made sense. Instead, I pointed the Bronco toward Colorado and started following a dead man's trail into the mountains. Somewhere around Pennsylvania, I noticed the SUV. It was black, a new model Suburban with tinted windows, and it stayed exactly 3 cars back no matter how I adjusted my speed. When I exited for gas near Pittsburgh, it followed. When I got back on the highway, it was there again, maintaining that precise distance. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Lots of black SUVs on the interstate. It didn't mean anything. But when I stopped at a truck stop outside Columbus for dinner, the SUV pulled into the parking lot a minute after I did. It parked at the far end, away from other vehicles, and nobody got out. I ate quickly, watching the SUV through the window. It just sat there, engine idling, windows too dark to see inside. When I walked back to the Bronco, I made sure to get its license plate number. Not that I could do anything with that information, but it made me feel slightly less helpless. The SUV followed me all the way to Chicago. By then, I was certain it wasn't coincidence. Someone knew I was heading to Colorado, and they were tracking my progress. The question was who? And why follow me instead of just stopping me? I called Sophia from a motel outside Chicago. It was almost midnight, but she answered on the first ring. She never slept much. "What is Project Nightingale?" I asked without preamble. Silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her calculating the best response. "Where did you hear that name?" she finally asked. Her voice was different now, stripped of the mockery from the will reading. This was her boardroom voice, the one she used when something important was at stake. I found Dad's journal. In the truck he left me, along with a GPS that shows he visited some location in Colorado 47 times. "So I'm asking you again, what is Project Nightingale?" More silence. Then, "Ava, you need to turn around and go back to Montana. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me if I have the same genetic mutation that killed Mom." I heard her sharp intake of breath. "He told you. He wrote about it. About how we both have it. About how you're already showing symptoms. About how he was trying to find a cure." Sophia's voice hardened. "Then you understand why you need to stay out of this. What Father was doing, what needs to continue, it's necessary. It's not pretty, and it's not something you'd approve of, but it's necessary. So go home, Ava. Forget you saw any of this. Live your simple little life in the woods and let the adults handle the complicated problems." I thought about the journal entries, about trial subjects and adverse effects, and the careful documentation of failure after failure. Did those people consent, Sophia? The ones being used in these trials? The pause was answer enough. "You need to understand something," she said, and her voice had gone cold in a way that made my skin prickle. "Father built something important. A legacy that goes beyond making money or publishing papers. He was trying to save our family, trying to save me. I'm not going to let that work stop because you've developed a conscience. People aren't lab rats, Sophia. You can't just experiment on them because you're scared of dying." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really are naive. Do you know how many people die every year from preventable diseases? Millions. And we let it happen because we've decided that some arbitrary rules about consent and ethics are more important than actually solving problems. Father understood that real progress requires sacrifice. I understand it. You never will. Is that a threat? It's a warning," she said. "Stay away from Colorado. Stay away from things you don't understand. There are people who will protect Project Nightingale, Ava. People who won't be as patient as I am. So please, for once in your life, be smart. Go home." She hung up before I could respond. I sat on the scratchy motel bed, phone in hand, and tried to process what my sister had just confirmed. My father had been conducting illegal human experiments. Sophia not only knew about it, she was continuing the work. And now someone was following me, probably to make sure I didn't interfere. The smart thing would have been to listen to Sophia's warning, to turn around, go back to Montana, pretend I'd never found that journal or that GPS. I could have lived my life in ignorant peace, tending trails and tracking wildlife, while my sister committed atrocities in pursuit of a cure for a disease I might not even develop for another decade. But I've never been good at doing the smart thing. And more importantly, I kept thinking about those trial subjects. 47 trials, the journal had said. How many people was that? How many lives had my father destroyed trying to save one person? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I studied the map and the journal, planning my route into the mountains. If someone was going to stop me, they'd have to do it while I was still on public roads. Once I got into the backcountry, the Bronco would have advantages their suburban SUV couldn't match. I just had to make it that far. The next morning, I got back on the road before sunrise. The SUV picked me up again as soon as I hit the highway. It was almost comforting in a strange way, knowing exactly where my enemy was, better than wondering if they were out there somewhere, invisible and unpredictable. We drove west through Iowa and into Nebraska, flat land that seemed to go on forever, making the black SUV impossible to miss in my rearview mirror. Whoever was driving made no attempt to hide anymore. They wanted me to know I was being watched. Wanted me to feel the pressure, to second-guess my decision. It almost worked. Somewhere in the middle of Nebraska, with nothing around me but cornfields and highway, I nearly turned around. This was crazy. I was a park ranger, not some kind of investigator. I had no authority, no backup, no real plan beyond finding a secret facility and hoping I'd know what to do when I got there. But then I thought about my mother again. About the last time I'd visited her in the care facility, when she'd looked at me with confusion and fear and asked who I was. About how my father had watched his wife disappear into that terrible disease and decided the solution was to destroy other people's lives. About how Sophia was following the same path, convinced that her survival justified any cost. Someone had to stop it, and apparently that someone was going to be me. I crossed into Colorado in the late afternoon, the Rocky Mountains rising in the distance like a wall between the plains and the sky. The landscape started changing, becoming more dramatic, more beautiful. This was the kind of country I understood, where nature made the rules and humans had to adapt or suffer. The SUV was still behind me, closer now, only one car back. They knew where I was going, knew that their opportunity to stop me was running out. Soon I'd leave the highway for mountain roads where their vehicle would struggle. The town of Pagosa Springs sat at the base of the San Juan Mountains, a small mountain community that served as a gateway to the wilderness beyond. I stopped there for supplies, stocking up on food and water and cold weather gear. The locals watched me with the casual interest small-town people showed strangers, but nobody seemed concerned. Just another tourist heading into the mountains. I filled the Bronco's tank at a gas station on the edge of town. The SUV pulled in across the street, still maintaining that careful distance. I could see the driver now, a large man with close-cropped hair and the kind of build that came from serious weight training. He was on his phone, probably reporting my position to whoever had hired him. The route from the journal led north from Pagosa Springs on Highway 160, then on to progressively smaller roads. First a state highway, then a county road, then what the map labeled as a Forest Service road. The first waypoint was 20 miles in, marked at a place where the road split. I took a deep breath and started driving. The road climbed steadily into the mountains, following the contours of the land. Aspen trees lined the route, their leaves still green but tinged with the gold that would take over in a few weeks. The air was thinner up here, cleaner. I cracked the window and breathed it in, feeling my anxiety ease slightly. The SUV stayed behind me, but I could tell they were having trouble. The pavement ended after 15 miles, becoming dirt and gravel. The Bronco's high clearance and four-wheel drive made it perfect for this terrain. The SUV scraped its undercarriage on rocks and struggled with the loose surface. At the first waypoint, the road split just as the map showed. The main route continued north, well-maintained and clearly marked. The other option was barely visible, a two-track trail that disappeared into dense forest. No signs, no indication of where it led. According to my father's map, this was the way to Project Nightingale. I turned onto the trail and immediately knew the SUV couldn't follow. The track was too narrow, too rough, full of obstacles that would tear the undercarriage out of a street vehicle. I watched in my mirror as the SUV stopped at the junction, the driver getting out to assess the situation. He was big, probably 6'4" and 250 pounds of muscle. He wore tactical pants and a tight black shirt that showed off his physique. As I watched, he pulled a phone from his pocket and made a call. His face angry. I didn't wait to see what he decided to do. I pressed the accelerator and headed deeper into the wilderness, the Bronco bouncing over roots and rocks like it was born to this. My father had chosen his vehicle well. This truck could go places normal SUVs couldn't dream of reaching. The trail climbed higher, switchbacking up the mountainside. Through gaps in the trees, I caught glimpses of the valley below, already far beneath me. The air was noticeably thinner now, and I was grateful for the time I'd spent working at altitude in Montana. I was acclimated in a way city people like Sophia's hired muscle wouldn't be. The second waypoint was a creek crossing where the trail dipped down to ford a stream about 3 feet deep. The water was clear and fast-moving, probably snowmelt from higher elevations. I engaged the four-wheel drive and took it slowly, feeling the current push against the truck. The Bronco handled it perfectly, climbing up the far bank without slipping. Behind me, I heard an engine roar. The SUV had tried to follow. I stopped and looked back to see it stuck in the middle of the creek, water pouring in through the doors. The driver was out, waist-deep in the current, looking furious and helpless. His phone was probably ruined. He'd have to hike out, and that would take hours. I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction, then kept driving. One obstacle cleared, but I had no idea what waited ahead. The 3rd through 6th waypoints were marked at specific turns or landmarks, guiding me deeper into the San Juan wilderness. This area was pristine, untouched except for this single thread of trail. I saw elk grazing in a meadow, completely unafraid. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding thermal currents. This was why I'd chosen my career, why I'd walked away from my father's world. This was real. The 7th waypoint appeared on the GPS as I rounded a bend. According to the coordinates, I was within half a mile of Project Nightingale, but there was nothing here. Just trees and rocks and a view of the valley that took my breath away. Then I saw the waterfall. It was about 30 feet high, cascading down a rock face into a pool of crystalline water, beautiful and natural looking. Except waterfalls in this part of the San Juans usually showed weathering patterns, erosion marks where water had carved stone over millennia. This cliff face was too smooth, too uniform. And the waterfall itself fell in a pattern that was almost too perfect, like it had been engineered rather than formed by nature. I parked the Bronco in a concealed spot off the trail and approached on foot. Up close, my suspicions were confirmed. The rock face was artificial, some kind of composite material designed to look natural. The waterfall was real water, probably pumped up from below and recycled. It was an incredible piece of camouflage, the kind that would fool satellite imaging and casual hikers. I found the keyhole behind a particular boulder that sat slightly forward from the rest of the rock wall. It was positioned exactly where you'd rest your hand if you were steadying yourself while admiring the waterfall. Natural but intentional. The brass key from the truck turned smoothly, and I heard the sound of hydraulics engaging. A section of the rock wall, about 8 feet wide and 10 feet tall, swung inward on hinges that must have cost a fortune to engineer. Beyond was darkness and the hum of machinery. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside. Motion sensors triggered lights that illuminated a tunnel descending into the mountain. The walls were smooth concrete, the floor polished. Massive ventilation ducts ran along the ceiling. This wasn't some crude mining operation. This was a professional facility, built to last and built to stay hidden. The tunnel descended for what felt like a quarter mile, switchbacking several times to manage the grade. It eventually opened into what could only be described as an underground complex. Multiple levels carved into the mountain, connected by stairs and elevators. Laboratories with equipment I recognized from my limited biology education and much more that I didn't. Living quarters, an operating theater. A server room full of computer equipment that must have represented millions of dollars in hardware. And everywhere, the Thorne Biogenetics logo. That elegant double helix that represented my father's empire and, apparently, his crimes. I found the security center first, drawn by the glow of monitors. The system was still active, cameras showing various parts of the facility. Most areas were empty, the lights dimmed in power-saving mode, but a few sections showed signs of recent activity. A laboratory with equipment that hadn't been properly cleaned. Living quarters with unmade beds. This place hadn't been abandoned, it was just between uses. The security system had an archive function. I started pulling up old footage, working backward from the most recent files. What I saw made my stomach turn. People being brought into the facility. Not scientists or researchers, but subjects. I could tell by their clothes, by the way they moved, by the fear in their faces. They were immigrants, most of them. People without papers who'd been picked up somewhere and promised work or medical care. Homeless individuals who'd disappeared and wouldn't be missed. The footage showed them being processed. Medical exams, blood draws, genetic testing. Then the injections began. My father's experimental gene therapy, administered to people who clearly had no idea what they were participating in. Some reactions were mild: fever, nausea, disorientation. Those subjects were monitored for a few days, then either released or moved to another part of the facility I couldn't see on camera. Other reactions were horrific. I watched people seize uncontrollably, their bodies rejecting the treatment in ways that should have been fatal. Some survived but were changed, their movements jerky and uncoordinated, their eyes showing confusion and terror. A few tried to escape, but the facility was designed to prevent that. And then there were the deaths. I counted 17 in the footage I reviewed, spread across the 8 years my father had been running Project Nightingale. 17 people who died in agony as their cells mutated out of control, or their organs shut down, or their brains swelled until they lost all function. 17 people that I knew about. How many more had there been before the current security system was installed? How many bodies were buried somewhere in these mountains? I was crying by the time I reached the most recent footage, dated 2 weeks ago. It showed Sophia walking through the facility with a team of researchers in white coats. She looked perfectly at home here, discussing results and timelines with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. She'd continued my father's work without hesitation, without doubt, without any apparent concern for the human cost. In one clip, she was talking to a subject, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25. The woman was strapped to a hospital bed, IV lines running into both arms. She was crying, begging to be let go. She said she had a daughter, that she was supposed to start a new job, that people would be looking for her. Sophia's response was chilling in its banality. She simply told the woman to stay calm, that the treatment would be over soon, that she was contributing to something important. Then she nodded to a technician, who increased the flow rate on one of the IVs. The woman's pleas became screams, then incoherent sounds, then nothing at all as the drugs sedated her into silence. I found the main server room and started downloading everything I could. The facility used a sophisticated network system, but the security wasn't designed to keep out someone who already had physical access. I connected a portable drive and began copying files, research data, financial records, video archives, personnel files showing everyone who'd worked on Project Nightingale. It would take hours to copy everything. While the files transferred, I explored the rest of the facility. I found the living quarters where subjects had been housed, small rooms with hospital beds and monitoring equipment. I found the morgue, thankfully empty but showing signs of regular use. I found an incinerator that had probably been used to dispose of remains, and I found my father's office. It was modest compared to his corporate spaces, just a desk and a chair and a wall of filing cabinets, but it was clearly where he'd spent his time here, where he'd done his thinking. The desk was covered in notes, genetic diagrams, drug interaction charts. A coffee mug sat beside the keyboard, still containing dried residue from the last cup he'd drunk. On the wall was a photograph of Sophia and me as children, maybe 7 and 3. We were at the beach, building a sandcastle together. Sophia was carefully engineering the structure while I just piled sand randomly, my face covered in grit and joy. I remembered that day. It was one of the few times Sophia had played with me like a real sister instead of treating me like a subordinate. That photograph broke something in me. My father had sat in this office, conducting unforgivable experiments on innocent people, while looking at a picture of his daughters as children. How did he reconcile those things? How did he convince himself that murdering strangers was acceptable if it meant saving one of the little girls in that photo? I heard the hydraulic door opening somewhere above me. The sound echoed through the facility, unmistakable and terrifying. Someone had arrived. Multiple someones, judging by the footsteps I could hear through the ventilation system. Sophia's voice came next, amplified by the acoustic properties of the tunnel. "Ava, I know you're here. The security system alerted me as soon as you accessed the surveillance footage. We need to talk." I pulled the portable drive from the server, hoping I'd gotten enough. Then I ran. The facility was a maze, but I'd studied the security monitors and had a basic understanding of the layout. I headed for the lower levels, away from the main entrance, looking for the emergency exits that any structure like this would require. Code compliance, even in a secret, illegal research lab. I found stairs leading down to what must have been the bottom level. The air was cooler here, damper. I could hear water running somewhere. Probably the recycling system for the artificial waterfall. The emergency exit was marked with a simple sign, the kind that glowed in the dark. It was locked from inside, but the lock was mechanical. I turned the deadbolt and pushed. The door opened onto another tunnel, smaller and rougher than the main entrance. This one led horizontally rather than up, probably emerging somewhere downslope from the waterfall. I started moving through it, using my flashlight to navigate the uneven floor. Behind me, I heard the door open again. Footsteps, multiple people, moving faster than I could. They knew where I was going, probably had maps of every tunnel and exit. The tunnel ended at another concealed door, this one opening onto a boulder field about half a mile from where I'd parked the Bronco. I emerged into late afternoon sunlight that felt harsh after the artificial lighting of the facility. No time to adjust. I started running upslope, toward where I'd left the truck. I'd made it maybe 200 yards when I heard the shot. Not close, but close enough to make me drop instinctively. I looked back and saw 3 figures emerging from the same exit I'd used. One of them, a man I didn't recognize, was holding a rifle. They were shooting at me. Actually shooting. This wasn't intimidation or a warning. Sophia had authorized lethal force to protect her secret. I changed direction, using the boulders and trees for cover. Another shot rang out, and I heard the bullet impact a rock somewhere to my left. These weren't warning shots. They were trying to hit me. The Bronco was upslope and to the north. I couldn't reach it directly, not with someone shooting at me. But there was another option. The terrain here was steep and treacherous, full of loose scree and hidden drop-offs. I knew how to move in country like this. Did they? I started climbing, scrambling up a slope that was nearly vertical in places. My hands found holds automatically, muscle memory from years of trail work and rescue operations. Behind me, I heard cursing as my pursuers tried to follow. One of them, moving too fast and too carelessly, triggered a small rock slide. I heard him yell and then the sound of a body tumbling down the slope. I didn't look back to see if he was hurt. I just kept climbing. I reached the ridge and ran along it, the Bronco now visible below and to my left. Getting to it would mean descending, exposing myself. But I had no choice. The portable drive in my pocket was worthless if I died out here in the mountains. I half ran, half slid down the slope, creating my own small avalanche of loose rock and dirt. Reached the Bronco and fumbled with the keys. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped them once before managing to unlock the door. The engine turned over immediately, reliable as always. I threw it into gear and accelerated down the trail, not caring about the damage I was doing to the suspension. Behind me, more shots rang out, and I heard something impact the truck's body. They were still shooting. The trail descended rapidly, following the same route I'd taken up but much faster now. The Bronco bounced and slid on the loose surface, but the 4-wheel drive kept me moving forward. I passed the creek where the SUV had gotten stuck earlier. It was empty now, the driver presumably having hiked out hours ago. As I emerged onto the main Forest Service road, I allowed myself a breath. I'd made it. I had the evidence. Now I just needed to get somewhere with cell service and contact someone who could do something about it. That's when the black SUV appeared in my rearview mirror. Not the one from the creek, a different one. Newer, undamaged, driving fast enough to catch up within minutes. The driver was Lars, the man I'd seen in my father's office security footage. The one who'd been following me across the country. He must have had backup waiting, a second vehicle positioned for exactly this scenario. The chase down the mountain was the most terrifying experience of my life. Lars wasn't trying to capture me anymore. He was trying to kill me, ramming the Bronco from behind at every straight section, trying to run me off the road on the curves. The Bronco was tough, but it was also 30 years old. Every impact made something rattle loose, made the steering pull harder to one side. We were approaching the old bridge I'd crossed on the way in, a wooden structure spanning a deep ravine. It had seemed solid enough with just the Bronco's weight, but I remembered noticing weathered planks and rusty bolts. It wasn't built for heavy traffic or high speeds. An idea formed. Desperate, maybe suicidal, but the only option I could see. I accelerated onto the bridge and then, at the last possible second, hit the brakes hard and cranked the wheel. The Bronco went into a controlled skid, sliding sideways and stopping across both lanes. I was blocking the entire bridge. Lars was going too fast to stop. I saw his face through the windshield, saw the moment he realized what was happening. He tried to brake, tried to swerve, but momentum and physics don't care about desperation. The SUV hit the bridge's side rail at 50 miles per hour, The old wood exploded like kindling. For one suspended moment, the SUV was airborne, all four wheels off the ground, tumbling slowly as it arced over the ravine. Then it fell, 200 feet down to the rocky streambed below. I heard the impacts as it bounced off the cliff face, heard the final tremendous crash, and then saw the explosion as the fuel tank ruptured. I sat in the Bronco, trembling, unable to process that I'd just killed someone. I'd made it happen, had planned it and executed it perfectly. Lars was dead because of me. Part of me wanted to feel guilty. The rest of me remembered the footage I'd seen, remembered what he'd done to people at Project Nightingale, and felt nothing but grim satisfaction. I managed to drive the Bronco off the bridge before it collapsed completely. Wood was already creaking ominously from the impact. I made it to the far side and kept going, putting distance between myself and the burning wreckage. By the time I reached Pagosa Springs, I had a plan. I wasn't going to the police. Thorne Biogenetics had too much money, too much influence. Evidence could disappear. Witnesses could be discredited or threatened or worse. I needed to go public in a way that couldn't be covered up or explained away. I called Eleanor Price, an investigative journalist with the New York Times who'd made her reputation exposing corporate malfeasance. I'd read her work for years, admired her willingness to take on powerful people and institutions. "Miss Price," I said when she answered, "my name is Ava Thorne, and I have evidence of systematic human experimentation by Thorne Biogenetics. Are you interested?" There was a pause. Then, in a voice that was both skeptical and intrigued, she said, "I'm listening." We arranged to meet in New York, at Grand Central Terminal, with her lawyers present and multiple witnesses. I wasn't taking any chances. I spent 2 days driving east, barely sleeping, constantly checking my mirrors for more black SUVs. Eleanor met me as promised, along with 2 lawyers and a photographer. I handed over the portable drive and my father's journal. Then I sat for 8 hours while they reviewed everything, asking questions, verifying details, confirming that what I'd found was real and not some elaborate hoax. By the end of that session, Eleanor's skepticism had transformed into barely contained fury. "This is Tuskegee," she said quietly. "This is MK Ultra. This is every nightmare scenario about corporate ethics and medical consent rolled into one. We're going to burn them down, Miss Thorne. We're going to burn your family's empire to the ground." She was true to her word. The story broke 3 days later on a Sunday morning. Front page of the New York Times, above the fold, with the headline, "Thorne Biogenetics conducted illegal human experiments in secret Colorado facility." The article was accompanied by security footage screenshots, excerpts from my father's notes, and testimony from 2 survivors Eleanor's team had managed to locate. By noon, every major news outlet in the world was covering it. By evening, the FBI had agents at every Thorne Biogenetics facility in the country. By Monday morning, the company's stock had lost 90% of its value and trading had been suspended indefinitely. They arrested Sophia in her office on Monday afternoon. I watched it happen on CNN from Eleanor's office, where I was giving a deposition to federal prosecutors. My sister, who'd been so proud and confident at the will reading, was led out in handcuffs while reporters screamed questions and cameras captured every moment of her humiliation. She looked directly at one camera, and I swear she was looking at me through that lens. Her expression was pure hatred, mixed with something that might have been betrayal. She'd warned me to stay away. She'd given me a chance to preserve the family and the empire, and I'd destroyed it all. Good. The trials took months. Federal prosecutors built their case methodically, using the evidence I'd provided as the foundation. They charged Sophia with kidnapping, human trafficking, involuntary manslaughter for the deaths that occurred during experiments, and about 40 other counts that basically added up to being a monster who'd happened to inherit billions of dollars. Her lawyers were the best money could buy, but they couldn't explain away security footage. They couldn't cross-examine video evidence showing their client personally overseeing human experiments that violated every principle of medical ethics. They couldn't make the jury forget the testimony of survivors, people who'd been promised help and received torture instead. The verdict came back guilty on all counts. Sophia received 40 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. She'd be 78 years old when she got out, assuming she lived that long. The genetic mutation that my father had tried so desperately to cure would probably kill her decades before her sentence ended. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd destroyed hundreds of lives trying to save her own, and in the end, she couldn't escape the same fate that took our mother. Sometimes there is no cure. Sometimes the only choice is how you face what's coming, and whether you do it with your humanity intact. The courts liquidated Thorne Biogenetics entirely. Every asset was sold, every patent auctioned, every property divided up among creditors and victims. The money, tens of billions after lawyers and administrators took their cuts, went into a victim compensation fund managed by independent trustees. The survivors received lifetime medical care and financial support. The families of those who died received compensation, though no amount of money could bring back their missing loved ones. Some of that money came to me automatically, as Marcus Thorne's heir, but I signed it all over to the fund. I wanted nothing that had been built on that foundation of suffering. 6 months after the trial ended, I was back in Montana, back at my ranger station in Glacier National Park. My supervisor had held my job, understanding that what I'd been through wasn't the kind of thing you just bounce back from. The Park Service even gave me a commendation for courage, though I'd told them that exposing my family's crimes wasn't courage, it was just refusing to be complicit. I kept the Bronco. People thought that was strange, but it felt right. My father had left me that truck because somewhere in his brilliant, twisted mind, he'd known I would follow the trail he'd left. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was hope that someone would stop what he'd started before it consumed everything. I'll never know for sure. But I do know this. That truck wasn't just transportation. It was my father's last gift, the only honest thing he ever gave me. Not money or power or a place in his empire, just a vehicle capable of reaching the truth, and the tools to expose it. I drive it on patrol now, bouncing over dirt roads and fire trails, taking it places normal vehicles could never go. It's been repainted, the damage repaired, but it's still the same truck. Still reliable. Still honest in a way my family never was. Sometimes tourists ask about it, about why I drive something so old when the Park Service has newer vehicles available. I tell them it's paid off, that it's reliable, that I like the way it handles rough terrain. I don't tell them it's a reminder that inheritance isn't always about money or power. Sometimes what you inherit is a choice about what kind of person you're going to be. Eleanor Price won a Pulitzer for her reporting on Project Nightingale. She interviewed me for a follow-up piece last month, asking how I'd moved forward after everything. I told her the truth. You don't move on from something like that. You move through it. You wake up every day and decide that the evil you've seen doesn't get to define you. You decide that other people's cruelty doesn't justify your own. You decide to be better than your bloodline. I got tested after everything came out. The genetic markers are there, same mutation that killed my mother and will probably kill Sophia in prison. I'll likely start showing symptoms in my 40s, maybe sooner. I might have 20 good years. I might have 10. There's no way to know. I'm not afraid. Or maybe I am, and I've just made peace with being afraid. Either way, I know one thing with absolute certainty. When my time comes, when the tremors start and the memories begin to slip away, I'll face it knowing I never sacrificed someone else's humanity to preserve my own. I'll face it knowing I chose justice over comfort, truth over family loyalty, and morality over survival. That's worth more than any empire. That's worth everything. The thing about toxic families is they teach you that love is conditional, that your value depends on how useful you are, how compliant, how willing to go along with their version of reality. They teach you that some people matter more than others, that blood is thicker than ethics, that winning justifies any cost. I'm here to tell you they're wrong. I'm here to tell you that breaking away from that toxicity, that standing up and saying this is wrong even when everyone around you says you're being dramatic or ungrateful or stupid, that's not betrayal. That's survival. That's evolution. That's becoming the person you were meant to be before they tried to shape you into something convenient. My father tried to cure a genetic disease by becoming a disease himself. My sister continued that work because she confused staying alive with being worth keeping alive. They both forgot the most important truth. Who you are matters more than how long you last. So here's my question for you, and I really want to know. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you ever looked at someone you love and realized they were asking you to compromise your soul for their comfort? What did you do? Did you walk away? Or did you stay and try to change things from inside? There's no wrong answer. Sometimes leaving is courage. Sometimes staying is courage. I just want to know I'm not the only one who's faced that impossible choice. And if this story resonated with you at all, if you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family because you refused to go along with something that felt wrong, do me a favor. Hit that like button so I know you're out there. Subscribe because I've got more stories about breaking free from toxic patterns and finding your own way. And drop a comment telling me your story, because I guarantee you're not alone. None of us are alone in this. The sun is setting over the mountains right now. painting the peaks in shades of gold and purple that no camera could ever capture. I'm sitting in my father's truck, the one inheritance that actually mattered, watching the day end and thinking about new beginnings. Tomorrow, I've got a group of high school kids coming in for a wilderness survival course. I'm going to teach them how to read the woods, how to respect nature, how to stay alive when everything seems determined to kill you. I'm also going to teach them that sometimes the most dangerous wilderness isn't out here in the trees. Sometimes it's in the buildings where empires are built on the backs of people nobody bothers to count. Sometimes the real survival skill is knowing when to walk away from everything you've been taught to value. That's my real inheritance from Marcus Thorne, not his money, not his empire, but the clarity to see that some prices are too high to pay, no matter what you're buying. The courage to stand alone if that's what it takes to stand for something. The understanding that losing everything can sometimes mean finding yourself. I wouldn't change any of it. Not the pain, not the fear. Not even the moment I watched Lars's SUV tumble off that bridge, because that was the moment I understood that survival isn't about living forever. It's about living with yourself when the lights go out at night. So thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And thank you for caring enough about truth and justice to stick around through the ugly parts. Like and subscribe if you believe people matter more than profits. Comment below if you've ever had to make an impossible choice. And remember, you're stronger than the people who tried to break you. You always were. I'm Ava Thorne. And this is how I inherited everything that mattered.